失礼するよ。ごめんなさいね。
Anyone else feel like he should file a lawsuit? We unfortunately didn't return right from where we left off last week, and instead we got a rather lengthy recap. And no, I'm not talking about or counting Shoma's opening narration. Stuff like that is fine, but I think it's a little obsessive to show the entirety of the last couple of minutes of the previous episode. In cases like this, it's clear that they're just filling up time before the opening. Speaking of which, I'm kind of surprised that Vlom still hasn't been added to it. Maybe next week. Anyway, we did eventually get some new content when Shoma tried to use his Cake King form, but even the best characters in the show couldn't stop the new rider. What did end up stopping them was realizing that the part-timer Granute was gone, as well as an exposition dump from Nival. He introduced his creation, as well as himself, to Valen, who was able to quickly put together that he was a member of the Stomach family, much to Shoma's surprise. The two sides called it a day, allowing our protagonist to regroup and continue this eventual liar revealed plot point. Of course, Hanto is still catching on to the fact that Shoma was hiding something from him. Thus, kind of thankfully, our main writer was at least smart enough to realize that he should at least explain who the big bads of their show were, which also let Hanto realize who was the Dami mommy who took him down in a previous episode. However, Shoma still withheld the little detail that he was the youngest brother of that family. What's worse is they even let Hanto have the false impression that he had some suppressed memories over how he avoided being compressed, even though he knew it was because he was half Granute. Again, I do think that this plot point is a little too stretched out at this point, but at the same time, I am enjoying how Hanto is slowly getting all the details just through some competent detective work, and Shoma is slowly starting to realize that he can't just keep up this act forever. Meanwhile, Nival showed off his creations to Suga, who of course was impressed by the new toy that just so happens to be on sale right now. Also, this is probably the first time, at least for me, that this guy actually sounded like some of the other characters he voice acted for.
なるほど。これで人間の姿に化けるってわけ。
At the same time, the bird Granute was back to his usual routine of luring victims in with his little scarf trick, but much like how social media could act as a good danger-seeking tool for a precure, it could be used by the riders, albeit with the opposite effect.
赤いスカーフの女じゃね。
こっち見てるよ。
Oh, come on. Y'all are being way too prejudiced. I mean, they could just be any random lady. Okay, but seriously, the writers did come up with a pretty smart plan by creating a post to warn people of the Granute. Granted, not everyone has X or was just going to believe something that was posted on the internet.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell...
But enough would, or at the very least, choose not to interact with someone who could at least be a dangerous person. That said, yeah, this is a rather crude drawing, made not by a grade schooler, but Hanto.
目が大きかった気がする。
え？こうが。
I'm both looking forward to, and yet also dreading the eventual divorce between these two wholesome idiots. Anyway, thanks to Sachika's accounts, they were able to realize that the bird monster had control over the winds, though apparently he couldn't use it on himself to cool down, as without any victims, he wasn't going to get his dark treat fix and went through some withdrawals.
複雑な刺激が絡み合って俺の舌に腹に心に絡みついてくる。もう闇菓子を知らなかった頃には戻れねえ。
You behave yourself! Though for Lage, this ended up triggering something else for him, which, yeah, we'll talk more about that in just a bit. For now, the Granute just figured that he'd go for quantity over quality, as he just uses wind powers as a vacuum to suck in victims, which, needless to say, wasn't gonna put smiles on anyone's faces unless they're really into the Twister movies, which why would you be? The writers, quite literally, caught wind of this, and thus were able to track down the attic bird. However, and while still apathetic to his client, especially after that little breakdown, Vlom was actively looking to take out the riders for his own reasons. Fortunately, they managed to split up, with Shoma giving chase to the bird while Hanto dealt with Lage. This led to a couple of good battles. I mean, the one with the bird Granute was the lesser of the two, as of course it was more akin to just your typical Monster of the Week fight. Still, it wasn't bad, as it did have good moments like this nice tracking shot in the middle of the fight, and I did get an immature kick out of this.
Oh god, was I hit by one of my own kind?
I think this is also the first time in a decent while that Shoma was able to give a proper ultimatum to a Monster of the Week, which I do think will play a role in regards to Lage. And speaking of whom, yeah, Hanto's fight with him was the much better of the two, as they really got across the power and skill gap between the two riders. Yeah, while statistically Vlam was a lot stronger than base Valen, I think what really put him over the top was the fact that Lage was just a much better fighter, unlike Hanto, who we've always known was just kind of a regular guy who stumbled upon superpowers. As such, to him, even Lage seemed like a member of the Stoma family in comparison to him. Not that the enemy rider himself liked hearing that, as it seemed to be a legit berserk button for him, and the episode ended with him launching a powerful finisher onto Hanto.
Okay, so before we get to the closing thoughts, why don't we circle back to that earlier flashback and talk about it in relationship to this last scene.
Now, according to the credits, this character was listed as Lage's younger brother. Yeah, okay, so first of all, this was the voice of a guy who's actually the same age as me. Kazutomi Yamamoto has just always had a very feminine voice.
そうでもしなきゃもう闇出しは買えないんだ
実は僕転校生で明日からこの学校通うんですけど
Second, we could clearly see that the brother, who Lage seemingly called Komel in the next episode preview, was a dark treat addict. And just based on Lage's general disposition, it's very likely they OD'd on the stuff or something, resulting in his constant apathy, unless someone associates him with the Stormark family, who he is working for. Obviously, all of this is pointing to him trying to undermine them from within, so much to Shoma's pleasure, he could become their ally.
Which, I'll be honest, I'm not entirely for.
I mean, from a character standpoint, it does make a lot of sense for Shoma, as while he has seemingly become more reluctant to the idea that he'll ever find a good Granute aside from his uncle, he does still want to find one, if only to give him some hope for his race. And if he does work with Lage, well, that could lead to a nice dramatic rift between him and Hanto, on top of all of his lies being revealed eventually.
However, that does bring up the little issue of needing to redeem Lage, which is a bit of a tall order considering the dude has a bit of a body count.
Granted, they could do some kind of twist to somewhat absolve him, like maybe he didn't hand over actual humans and just a bunch of fakes to the Stolmarks, though I would find that very unlikely, as the Stolmarks probably have some sort of technique to discover counterfeit human presses. And even if that were the case, it doesn't change the undeniable fact that he drugged and abducted a bunch of people that would still put him in the darkest of gray areas. I don't know, I just don't think he should be fully forgiven for his actions, whatever the case might be, especially in a show like this, where they have made it clear that those who would selfishly take the lives of others just for their own benefit don't deserve any sort of mercy.
Still, I'm willing to sit back and let things play out, because overall, this was a good episode to further Lage's introduction.
Whatever they end up doing with his character, he's still being built up quite well, and comes off as a massive threat who keeps telling our heroes to GG.
Meanwhile, the Monster of the Week fight was a lot of fun, if only for the simple fact that they defeated him by getting him cancelled.
Episodes like this do make an old millennial like me realize that the times are a-changing. Thus, I actually do like the idea of our heroes using social media to defeat their enemies and fight crime. I can really enjoy stuff like that, just as long as they don't overdo it, like say, turn the characters into influence. But yeah, I like the way the writers did here, especially using Hanto's art to get their message across. Meanwhile, Lage is at least becoming a more fleshed out character, so if he does pull a slight face turn, it at least will be somewhat warranted. Likewise, the inevitable fallout between Hanto and Shoma continues to be built up nicely, and hopefully we'll get some good payoff. A lot of wheels are turning right now, though as a result, it does mean an in-between episode like this doesn't have much to it other than a few good fights and some decent laughs, but still, that overall makes for a good episode in my books. Whether or not it'll lead to much better stuff later remains to be seen, but hopefully it'll be something that'll blow us away.
And with that, this first long weekend of a bunch of reviews back-to-back is finally over.
We'll try to keep up the schedule, as it actually was a little more manageable than I originally expected, and y'all seem to be enjoying the new stuff we're covering.
Look forward to a lot more coming soon, and until then though, farewell for now my friends, and... No, if you excuse me, I got another job to do. Don't worry ma'am, we'll get right into getting your windows up as soon as possible.